This happened during a particularly cold autumn in the interior of the Yukon. At that time, I was working as a heavy equipment operator for a small company that opened forest roads for mineral exploration. Our camp was pretty isolated, several hours away from the nearest town. The only access was a dirt road that in some stretches barely allowed 2 pickup trucks to pass each other. There were 6 of us living there on rotations that lasted several weeks. The workdays were long, but the job itself was simple. Clear trees, level the ground, and push the road forward as much as possible before the harsh winter arrived. One night, after dinner, 2 coworkers and I went out to check on some tools that had been left near an area where we had been working earlier that day. It was about 500 meters from the camp. We didn't want to leave them out because if it rained again, they would end up buried in mud. We carried flashlights and a shotgun that we normally brought along in case a curious bear showed up. The place was quiet. The only sounds were the wind moving through the trees and the noise of a small creek nearby. As we walked, one of my coworkers, Rick, moved a little ahead of us to shine his flashlight toward the machines. I was a few steps behind, talking to the other guy about the next day's work. That was when we heard a loud thud from inside the trees. It wasn't a branch breaking in the wind. It sounded like something heavy had pushed against a trunk. Rick stopped and pointed his flashlight toward the forest. At first, we didn't see anything. Then we heard a low growl. It wasn't like a bear's growl. It was deeper, longer. And before we could react, something came out from between the trees. It moved fast. Rick's flashlight lit up a large figure covered in dark hair. It was running toward us on 2 legs. Rick barely had time to step back before the thing shoved him with enough force to knock him to the ground. His flashlight rolled away and ended up pointing toward the trees, so everything was half lit from the side. I raised my flashlight and saw it clearly for a second. It was enormous, much bigger than any of us. Its shoulders were wide, and its arms were long. It was leaning over Rick, as if it was trying to push him away from the path. Rick yelled and tried to shield himself, while the creature forced him against the ground. My other coworker lifted the shotgun and fired into the air, without really aiming. The sound echoed through the forest. That's what made it stop. The thing lifted its head suddenly. I could see its eyes reflecting the light from the flashlight. They didn't look like the eyes of a normal animal. It looked at us for a few seconds. Then it struck the ground with one hand, almost like it was frustrated or angry, and it ran back into the forest. The whole thing lasted less than 10 seconds. We rushed to Rick and helped him up. His jacket was torn, and he had several scratches on his arm and chest, but luckily he wasn't seriously injured. We went back to camp as fast as we could. That night, none of us slept much. The next morning, we returned to the place with more people from the crew. In the mud, we could clearly see large footprints, much longer than a person's. There were also small trees bent over and broken branches, as if something heavy had moved through the area. Rick left the job a few weeks later. He never wanted to talk much about what happened. He only said one thing once that I still remember. When that thing pushed him to the ground, he felt like it wasn't trying to kill him. It seemed more like it wanted to move him out of the area, as if we had been standing too close to something we weren't supposed to see. This happened a few years ago when I worked as a driver for a small company that delivered fuel and supplies to mining camps in the interior of the Yukon. It wasn't an exciting job, but it paid well, and I liked driving long distances. Most of the routes were forest roads that ran for miles through the woods without a single house in sight. That day, I was heading back after dropping off a load near an old camp north of Dawson. It was late September, so it was already getting dark earlier in the evening. The road was wet because it had rained during the night, and the mud forced me to drive slower than usual. About 30 or 40 kilometers from the camp, I saw something strange on the road. At first, I thought it was a moose crossing because that's very common in that area. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving like a normal animal. It was standing on the side of the road. I slowed down because I thought it might be a bear, but when the truck's headlights lit it up better, the hair on my arms stood up. It was too tall. Whatever it was easily stood over 2 meters tall. It had wide shoulders and its body was covered in dark hair. It wasn't walking on 4 legs or anything like that. It was standing upright like a person. It stayed still for a few seconds facing the road, almost as if it was listening to the truck's engine. I slowed down nearly to a stop because honestly, I had no idea what I was looking at. It didn't seem scared. That was the strange part. Animals usually run as soon as they see lights or hear a motor, but that thing just slowly turned its head toward the truck. I still remember the moment when the headlight hit its face directly. I didn't see it perfectly, but enough to notice it wasn't a bear. The face looked flatter and its eyes reflected the light for a second. Then it took 2 long steps toward the forest. It didn't leap or run like animals do. They were long, calm strides, like someone walking quickly, and it disappeared between the trees. I sat there in the truck for about 20 seconds staring at the spot where it had entered the forest. Everything was quiet again. When I finally moved forward, I looked at the edge of the road. The mud was marked with large tracks. They looked like human footprints, but enormous. I didn't get out of the truck. Honestly, I had no intention of doing that. I just kept driving until I reached the next stretch of road where I could get radio signal. That night, I told 2 workers at the camp where I stayed what had happened. I thought they would laugh, but one of them went quiet. He told me that years earlier, when he worked in mineral exploration, several men had seen something similar in an area not far from there, always at night or at dusk, always near the forest. It never attacked anyone, it just watched and then disappeared. I don't know exactly what I saw that afternoon, but I know 2 things for sure. It wasn't a bear, and it definitely wasn't a person. I still remember that day because winter had arrived earlier than usual. Snow had just started covering the forest floor, and everything was silent in a strange way. The kind of silence that settles over the interior of the Yukon when the cold suddenly takes hold. I had traveled several hours along a remote road that almost no one uses that time of year. After a certain point, the road disappears, and all that remains is forest and an old route that in winter becomes barely visible under the snow. The sky was completely gray, and small flakes were falling, so light you barely noticed them until they started collecting on your clothes. There was no strong wind, just that typical silence of places where there are no towns or highways nearby. When I reached the small clearing where I needed to stop, I turned off the engine, and for a moment, everything became completely still. The first thing I noticed was the absence of sound. No birds, no branches moving, just the distant sound of wind moving through the trees. As I walked along the edge of the clearing, I saw something that made me stop. Footprints in the snow. At first, I thought they might belong to a moose or maybe a wolf, but when I got a little closer, I realized they weren't animal tracks. They had the shape of a foot, but they were far too large. Each print was easily over 30 centimeters long, and they were spaced apart as if whoever made them had a very long stride. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They came from the forest, and they stopped near the clearing. That was what gave me a bad feeling. Something hadn't just passed through. It looked like someone or something had been standing there watching the place for a while. I looked around the forest. Everything was still quiet. The problem with places like that is how dense the forest is. After just a few meters, you can't clearly see anything between the trunks. I decided to finish what I had to do quickly. While I was checking the equipment, I heard a sound behind the trees. Something heavy moving through the snow. It wasn't a light step. It sounded more like something large moving slowly. I turned off the motor of the tool I was using and stood there listening. The sound came again. One step, then another. I couldn't see anything, but I was sure it was coming from the direction where the tracks began. I felt that clear sensation that someone or something was watching from the forest. It didn't take long before I saw movement. Between the trunks, about 20 meters away, a dark figure appeared. It was tall, much taller than any person standing among those trees. It moved slowly. It didn't step fully into the clearing. It remained partially hidden between the trunks, almost as if it didn't want me to see it clearly. But enough for me to notice something that made me go cold. It wasn't on four legs. It was standing upright. And it was looking at me directly.